good evening, everybody. Good evening, good evening. Hey, sorry about the delay today, but I'd like to welcome you to the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge session. We are we are significantly late today, but I apologize. It's the beginning of the year. As you know, a lot of different things are going on, uh, so we were a little bit tardy today. I hope that everyone had a great Christmas, a great time with their family. Um, and I hope you're looking forward to a new year, new times. You've never been into 2022 before, so it is something new that everyone can hopefully enjoy, despite the fact of an ongoing pandemic, racial unrest in the country, mass shootings, and I hate to laugh with so many problems that are currently going on. Um, we wanted to talk today about a couple of issues I'm gonna touch on today. But first off, what I want to say is we are almost at a I think we started and I have to check that date. Uh we actually did our first Erudition as a organization broadcast around this time last year. We was one of the first things that was ever put on and produced by Erudition. So we are just about at a year of doing um, these shows and talking about Black history, and I'm so excited about that because one of the things is you know the amount of people that we've been able to uh, talk to, different shows I've been allowed to go on. I'm so thankful to God that we've been able to continue this and to make this broadcast a priority. Um, though, despite everything that was going on, it's a lot to do to try to talk and go into this, especially with scheduling and, as I just said, all these different things that go on in our lives. But I appreciate you, those who have watched and have become just stable with us and watch every week. Even if you don't see the live broadcast, I do see when people go back and they click and they watch the rebroadcast, on Facebook or on YouTube. I see the statistics and the different things, and I greatly appreciate you all out there. Good evening, good evening. Good to see you. Good to see you, Regina. Thank you for this, Sister Regina. I'm happy that you're here. Is that my brother? Yes, it is. Yeah, it's been almost a year, man. It's about a year. It's nice. So I'm thankful to God for it. Oh, thank you so much for your prayers. And you can, I am doing a lot better. Takes time to heal. One of the things I did today, my son was joking because we were rushing in, and I had coveralls on. Right, I look very country bumpkin today, and you may see it over one of these chairs right here, one of the straps. And I was like, I don't want to come on and look all country bumpkin, but I am going to keep my tire hat on today. Um, let's get into this. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today, we're coming up on um, the first of the year, and the first of the year for African Americans, I think we've kind of kept some of our traditions, but at the same time, we've lost, in my opinion, my humble opinion, we've lost some of the understanding um, of what the first of the year meant to our ancestors. And it's an important thing for us to remind ourselves about, because quite honestly, quite honestly, without the endurance of our ancestors, without the idea, the faith and the hope that went into every year, when you are born in slavery and in this country, stripped of your culture, your knowledge of self, stripped of your history. Um, it is something that we need to understand. We need to embrace. Um, every beginning of the year, we do watch night, and we talked a little bit a couple of months ago about what watch night means to African Americans, um, especially as it pertains to the Emancipation Proclamation, and it being put into place uh, by Lincoln, and the prayers that went the night before, right? The night before, and the slaves and freedmen coming together in some of these churches, some of these areas, praying that that president would sign um, the Emancipation Proclamation, thereby allowing not everyone to be free, um, but it was a step. It was a step um, for African Americans. It was a step for us to have some understanding of freedom. We talked a couple of months ago when we were talking about Juneteenth, the different times and periods that went into um, how Black folks became free. But that night is significant because January 1st, 1863, the nation was in its third year of the Civil War. Thousands of men had died. And at that time, no one was willing to say that the war was a war for slavery. Before that, there were many different things to lie about and say this was about the state's rights to have slaves. But at the heart of it, what it was a war. As John Brown said, the only way that the country could be purged of the evil of slavery is through blood. And him, as an abolitionist, having gone to go try to emancipate Blacks on his own, and to have the uprising in the South, right, in Harper's Ferry, and be captured and killed. It is significant. It is significant having all of that past happen. Blacks were told, the word got out that Lincoln was going to sign this Emancipation Proclamation. And what did they do? This is significant. What they did is they went to churches. They prayed. They went there and they sought the guidance of God, right? Yes, Birth of a Nation is a movie. I suggest you watch it. It's harder to, it's something that you probably should watch. I watched it in film school many years ago. It was the first time I actually sat there and watched it fully through. If anything, just to understand the mentality of the people at the time. Hey, Earl, good to see you. Thank you for your prayers, brother. Lincoln didn't do it to free slaves. He did it to punish the South. There is some truth to that. But I will say this. I will say this about the emancipation, and now I'm going to get back to the subject at hand. Lincoln understood. If you read the Gettysburg Address and you read that and you kind of understand that Lincoln understood that this slavery thing had stained America, right? And he also understood, eventually, I didn't say at the beginning, he also understood that it could not stand, that you cannot be a country that declares and says freedom for all in its documentation, in its belief, right? And then at the same time, deny that very thing to people on a daily basis. Lincoln, if you read his second inaugural, understood. He was forced to understand as John Brown said, because it was purged in blood. In blood. He had to understand, right? When he said that we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived, he meant by a nation that was conceived on the idea of freedom and so dedicated can long endure. That's what he said. And we must meet on a great battlefield of that war. But and he later goes on to talk about the dedication. But then he says we cannot dedicate. We cannot even consecrate. It cannot even be hallowed, this ground. Because these people died on both sides for a belief that was created by America. Both sides of it. The idea of freedom, and then the cognitive dissonance of enslaving and imprisoning people. All a part of the American experience. And so to honor these people, what he wanted to say, the devotion of it, to honor, to give, is that we have to resolve that they did not die in vain, that we learn from that lesson. He actually said that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, this country under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. See, regardless of what his intention at the beginning was, of trying to get slaves out, of trying to win the war, God will visit us all. The understanding was at the end of it was that, hey man, all of this death has happened because of these beliefs that we allowed to grow. So it's a good point, Earl. Good point. The only thing that I dislike about the Emancipation Proclamation is that it wasn't enforced as much as I would like it to be, because some slaves didn't know they were free until 6 months after. During the time of war, Daniel, it is harder, especially right now. We can look back at that time and we can say these things, and we can say, okay, it should have been a no-brainer, right? A no-brainer that, you know, he should have freed everyone. Lincoln freed those that were in the South. The idea of it was that if I free them and they escape, I hate to say this, but it's the truth. It is as if you took the working horses, the cattle, the ability to make war from warmongers. Slaves were the wealth of the South. So freeing them, he understood, would take great wealth from the South. And so in order to remove those slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation had to happen. And then it had to be leaked out to let them know, you're free. Now, did it free everyone? Absolutely not. But what it did is it crippled the South. We know that it crippled the South because later on, Southern Confederates had to go to slaves and tell them, if you fight for the Southern cause, we will eventually let you be free. And it created an issue in the Southern and the Confederate leadership. Jefferson Davis didn't believe in that, but they were losing the war. And this all happened because of that emancipation. That emancipation happened because of the pressure being put on the Union and the American president by both people overseas and internally. And let's not forget, getting back to our subject at hand, let's not forget the prayer, the continual fervent prayer, whether you're religious or not, the hope and the belief of the slave who went out there from can't see to can't see and sang praise to God every day, taught those praises to their children for generation after generation after generation. For the better part of 400-something years, this is what happened. And so the power, what I wanted to talk about tonight, the power of Watch Night. But before we get to Watch Night, can anybody that's out there, of the few that are out on right now, can you tell me what was the first of the year? What was the new year to the slave? before Watch Night, before the Emancipation Proclamation, before all of that, what happened every year around the first of the year for the slave? Were you taught that in school? Has anybody ever told you what that was? I'll give a moment for someone to speak to that, because it is very significant. It is very significant for us to know and understand what our ancestors, what they faced, what they saw. You can cheat a little bit, because one of the advertisements that we put out for today's session kind of tells you what it was. It kind of tells you what it was. Anybody? So no one, I hear you. They would have to work much harder. Jenna says, no, I was never taught that. Not that I know of. Hey, Grandma, how you doing? Glad you're here. What the first of the year was called for the slave, unfortunately, was called Heartbreak Day. And it was called Heartbreak Day because this was the time in which many slaves would be sold or leased or given away. This was the time at the beginning of the year where the master would sign papers to make more money with his slaves. He would apprentice slaves out. He would send them to different relatives. And Heartbreak Day, at the slaves knew the beginning of the year, they prayed that Heartbreak Day would avoid them. Prayed that they wouldn't lose any of their families on Heartbreak Day. They also called it Hiring Day, right? This is what happened. And it's a dark history that many of us do not talk about because a lot of us weren't taught it. Can you imagine at the beginning of the year that the master, you knew the master was going to come and take your child? The mother would be taken. The father would be taken. And you never knew by rhyme or reason because it was at the will of the master. And so you spent New Year's Eve praying, waiting, wondering if your master was going to come and they was going to take a wagon and split up your family. Heartbreak Day, because that's the term I prefer, not Hiring Day. Hiring Day sounds as if you were an employee. Heartbreak Day is the name of it. And it was an economic cycle because this was also the time where you would plan for your next crops. It is not currently a thing that we talk about because we look at Watch Night. And that is significant. But understand where that prayer came from. Understand why our ancestors, Black ancestors, met in these churches, in these places, and they prayed. They prayed because they didn't know. And it was easy to go from Heartbreak Day to Watch Night because they understood what prayer meant. You know, there was in a slave narrative, there's a slave who said, of all the days of the year, I dread New Year's Day the worst of any, because he had lost family every year for the 20 years at the time of his life. Another slave said on New Year's Day, we go to the auctioneer's block to be hired to the highest bidder for 1 year. We don't see our families. Some never see their families again. And that's where the saying comes from that what you do on New Year's Day, you'll be doing the rest of the year. That's where that comes from. Yeah, oh my. It's rough. It's rough. I'm sure some of those slaves didn't establish relations with their families as much so that Heartbreak Day wouldn't hurt as bad. Well, Teddy, you said something right there. Because a lot of times, right, especially in the African American mentality, so we talk about the experience, the physical experience, the beating, the torture, whatever. But we rarely do we focus on the psychological experience, the conditioning that you have to go through mentally to survive, the survival mentality, the survival spirit. Term it what you will, but it has stayed with us in our communities to this day. I'll give you an example. When you look at the Moynihan Report, and they said back in the 70s that Black fathers were not in the homes. When they said that the Black mother was a welfare queen and she was sitting here taking the welfare check. This is in the 70s and the 80s. But then we don't want to remember the history of how America, since its inception and even before, separated these Black families. Took these fathers and mothers and kids and sent them willy-nilly all anywhere, wherever they wanted to, for generations, for centuries. And the mental conditioning that goes with that, as Eddie said right there, you don't want to be too attached. You don't know how to be too attached because they're going to come and take my family. They're going to come take that child I just had. The idea of Heartbreak Day is significant. It's significant. What is it? Let me ask you out there. What is it that we are told to eat? What's two things that Blacks are told to eat every year on New Year's? I'll give you a moment. Yeah, Daniel, they don't teach it because, as you hear so often, it's painful. It's painful history. And because it's painful, people say, I don't want to even, I don't want to know about it. And then it's insane. Mm-mm. There's two things in the African American diet. Jenny got one. Black eyed peas. That is one. What's the other? Greens, y'all. You don't need no greens. You don't need no greens. Shout out to me. If Heartbreak Day has a mental impact on slaves and those slaves masters picking at random which slaves are sold off, was it less about the money, more about the impact on the slaves for the slave master? No. It was about money. It was about money because, again, you're chattel. They owed everything that comes, everything, live or dead. That's significant to know too. That comes out of that African American woman. Everything. You know, early medical. That's I'm gonna segue a little bit. Early medical studies in the United States. It's unfortunate, but if there was money to be made off Black babies, off Black children who didn't make it. I was telling someone one time, I said, you very rarely hear about a mentally disabled black slave child. There is some in the narratives, but very often those children were not allowed. They were not allowed to live. Can you imagine that? And there are books. Maybe I'll put one of these books out here after this episode that talk about the birth and the birthing practices. And I was going to do an episode on that of black female slaves and what they did to their children and what they did to their children, who, not just the newborns, those who didn't live within 2 to 3 years. And so that's a whole nother subject, but that's a good point to bring up, Sean Anthony, that it was definitely about money, finance, right? Stephen Ashley, that's what I was looking for. He wrote a book, The Breeding of American Slaves. Great book. Great book. Okay, Regina said greens. Also, yeah, greens. But question is, why? Why are we told to eat those black eyed peas and greens on New Year's? What's the significance? Because it is something that I've said in my life. I've heard people do. It's a ritual. And rituals don't always have to be. I saw someone this guy said, I don't do no rituals. Yeah, you do. If you go to church every Sunday, right? That's a religious ritual. You're doing that. You're doing something that's a behavior. It's what you're doing. But it used to be, there you go. That's said it. Prosperity. Virginia said, I was told it was good luck for the year. It was believed to bring you good luck, prosperity, wealth, right? Greater financial prosperity, independence. But also, what is left out, it was eaten. That was a ritual to do too, to say, Lord, let me not be taken on Heartbreak Day. Eat these beans, eat them greens. And we, because those beans are African tradition. And again, it comes down to West African ideals and how we melded that, right? Within how the slaves rather melded that into traditions. So there is much thought on that stays with us, but we lose the significance. We lose why our ancestors did these things. And so having these beings, and let's understand too, some of our ancestors came, and as things got watered down, that was traditions in their African culture, and it just fed on to us. And then also, when the master saw that them collard greens and them black eyed peas was good, hey, he wanted some of them too. But I've heard all kinds of tales about that. I've heard about the coins that the lentils, the beans represented coins, and the greens represented actual paper money. Whatever. At the heart of it was the idea of eating something that you felt would keep your family safe, would help your prosperity, will help you to be able to be worth something. Because prosperity for a slave is different, right? You don't own anything, but I'm of value. I want to be seen as something of value. Let's make that distinction. When we look at that, Heartbreak Day, and we've talked about that for a little bit here now. You should be able to also now understand how in 1863, when it came down that Lincoln that night, and understand the significance of that, because Lincoln didn't just do this on that day, or his people didn't do this on that day willy-nilly, right? They also understood the significance, right, of what Heartbreak Day and what the first of the year meant to the slave. It gives hope. It gives you something to think about when I say on that day, you will be free. You will be liberated. That does something to a mind. That does something to a spirit. And when you need people to go fight, that's the other issue. When you need African Americans or blacks and former slaves to want to go out here and fight for a country to ensure that we win this war, you have to win hearts and minds, as the military says. Hearts and minds. And you win those hearts and minds by giving people things that you may have to do. They don't need to know that you have to do it. You make them feel as if you gave them something, when in reality, you gave them really nothing. It's what had to happen. As Earl said, Lincoln did not free everyone, but he freed those who he had to free. Anybody out here? I saw a lot of you say that you never heard of Heartbreak Day. How many of you, however, there's a lot of church folks that I know here, have heard about Watch Night? Is Watch Night something new to you that you've never heard? And if you have heard about it, tell me, what is the significance of Watch Night? I just gave you the political significance. But as Black people, what are we taught about it in our churches today? What's the significance of Watch Night in our churches today? And not just African Americans. I've seen white churches have Watch Night. What's the significance? What are we being taught about it? Is it just that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation? What are we being told about it? I'm really looking for a word here, because there was a word, specific word, that our ancestors used when Lincoln signed that emancipation. There was a word that was used every year, right, that they stayed prayerful, remembering the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was something that they said was going to happen. They saw it as a time. I'm leading you into it if you don't know it. It was a time of something. Specific word. And you have to understand that they had seen a lot. They'd seen Benjamin Butler, General Benjamin Butler had called them contraband. They'd seen the first Confiscation Act when Congress decided to pass and decided to say that escaped slaves whose labor had been used on behalf of the Confederacy or had worked for the Confederacy, we could confiscate them, thereby letting them be free. They had John Fremont, who decided he was going to free them by military commander. So they had seen a lot of different. There we go. That's my son. He said it. Jubilee. They said it was the time of Jubilee. Let me tell you something. That is a significant thing to say, because if you understand what the word Jubilee means, right? It means that you are commemorating, you're celebrating. It means that you are in elation. It is a festival. You are, this is something so wonderful. It has never happened, and you have to mark that event. And they marked that event. They said this is a time of celebration, a time of jubilee, a time to give thanks to God, a time to thank the Creator for freeing us as He freed the children of Israel. Preachers went on and on and on talking about freedom. It was infectious. Abolitionists, somewhat abolitionists, people all over who had been toiling for the idea of the slave to be free wanted to mark that day. They all prayed together. Significant thing in the African American church, because that is what gave strength and purpose to the African American church. And that is one of the most powerful organizations. If you are not religious, it doesn't matter. You cannot dispute that that is one of the most powerful organizations in the history of this country. The Black church built towns. The Black church taught people how to do jobs, trade. The Black church kept people going when they thought that there was no other thing that they could do. They raised your kids. They took care of the community. Civil rights movement was led by the Black church. None of that would have happened without marking the idea and the revelry of the fact that God, I prayed to God and He heard my cry. I love the significance and the history of Watch Night. And I hear many preachers talk about it. But I don't hear too many know what led into it. And that is why I wanted to talk about that today. I wanted us to talk about that as we started to go into this new year. And this new year, we're seeing already some things that are kind of repeating themselves in history. You know, there was they pulled the Lee statue down and they found material. I don't know if any of you all have seen that on the news. They found boxes holding material from dating back to the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. That lets us kind of get a look into where people's minds are and what they were thinking. And so it's always significant to me when anybody finds a time box or a box full of something that is older, because you need to go back and read firsthand. So you can't lie about what people were thinking when they wrote it down themselves and they documented it themselves, or where we are, who we are, and what we do. I guess the other thing that we should talk about tonight, as we talk about all of these things at the first of the year, is are there any African American traditions that you follow other than the greens and the black eyed peas? What else do you do? What else do you do? Is there something that has been passed down through your family? My family, we're Christian, we pray in the new year. I was raised to do that. Prayer is a significant thing in my family every year as we go into a new year. Praying and thanking God for what we've gone through and what He's allowed us to endure and make it through, the blessings and the benefits that we've earned, we've gained. and also praying for, somebody said it earlier, a prosperous new year. That is no different than what our ancestors did hundreds of years ago. I often tell my sons that in every aspect of your life, everything that is going on in this country, you have to consider that someone in your timeline, in your ancestral timeline, thought about you, prayed for you, hoped for you. Those who were alive during that time of Jubilee marked that idea so it could be passed on to you. And let me tell you, some of the people out there who are saying, well, that's for black. No, because a lot of our white ancestors would not have made it either without those black folks. Prayers, nurturing, feeding. So it's important. It's important. Let me ask you this. We need to pray for healing and restoration of the soul and the spirit of the black race that was broken during slavery. Generational curses are the product of a broken spirit that was never healed, never been restored. Amen to that, Regina. That is true. Never restored. Dustin said, looking at the new year with positive anticipation. As you should. And we should all pray for positive. All right, Dave, see you next week. Thank you for stopping by. I know we're running a little bit over time. We started late today. So I thank you for sticking with us. You know, Regina said that, you know, we need to pray for healing because these generational curses have broken the spirit of black people. It has. And a lot of us do not understand how it plays into our everyday life, how it has been passed down from generation to next generation. When we talk about our history on here, or when you go and you watch any other program and someone is giving you parts of our history that you did not know. And when I say our history, let me clarify to you. We call it Black history because it is a part of Black culture. But Black history is American history. Don't ever get it twisted. Don't ever get it wrong. It's American history. It's world history. It's just that we're taught it for many different reasons, and lies are put out and perpetuated that it is not as important or it's not as significant. And as Sister Regina said in there, it's never been restored to us, given back to us. We give it different names and we find different ways to excuse it and lie about it and say that we don't want to talk about it. We call it CRT. That's a new buzzword for the day. Right? We call it a heartbreaking history. We've been told, we've actually had senators and presidents and businessmen who have got up here and said, slavery has been over a long time ago, get over it. And at the heart of all of this, right, when we don't face the realities of our history, when we don't talk about these things, such as Heartbreak Day, because we don't want anybody to know that one culture dominated another, which is illogical because we know that slavery existed. We know that black codes existed. We know that Jim Crow existed. We know that people still have racially motivated agendas in this country. We know that by action and deed. We know that by action and deed. Get on YouTube anytime and go watch and see what brown and black people are going through in this country. See how some whites they catch hell because they're friends with a person of color. Listen to the testimonials of those who actually live through it every day. And then you won't have to sit there and ask yourself, well, why do we go over these things, Eddie, and why do we talk about these things? We talk about them because they're important. I heard Earl had said on here earlier that Lincoln, I'm going to get back to Lincoln for a moment here, that Lincoln had an agenda. Yes, he did. There's no disputing that. But I often try to read further. And this is what I mean by going and reading further. You know why you know about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but you don't know about Lincoln's second inaugural address? You don't know about his inaugural address because what Lincoln said was significant. Because what he said lets you understand that he had changed in those years. What he talked about when it came to the slave, when he understood that the slave the former slave, I should say, under God, because he said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. That's what he said, right? And he said, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for the widow and the orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and our nation. That was a man that understood the only way to prevent this from ever happening again is to bring everybody together. When he said that the Almighty has his own purpose, woe unto the world because of the offenses, for it must needs be the offenses come, but woe to the man by whom the offenses cometh. Lincoln understood toward the end of his life, and a few days later, he was killed. He was killed because he understood that the only way to come to do anything is to come together. It's to come together. And so we have to understand that, as Sister Virginia and as Dustin said, let's have positive anticipation. Let's pray for restoration and understanding, unity. Granddad, he's always represent how his parents would you or wouldn't do, and now you can kind of understand where the mentality derived from preparation for Heartbreak Day. I wonder if he had lived, would the South have been forgiven as they were, and would Jim Crow still have happened? I don't know, but I will tell you this. Ulysses S. Grant, when he became president, when he sent troops down to the South, when he basically put the South under martial law, he did so because he believed in what Lincoln, him, and Sherman had decided during the time of war. And Grant was one of the people who fought with Andrew Johnson hard over and over again with the idea of what Lincoln wanted to do, where the country needed to go, to treat people as people. It sounds so simple. But I'm going to tell you, one of the things that has always disturbed me with this is that after the Civil War, right after, there was great attempts to elevate freed blacks. People were on it because in the North and in the South, they had lost families during the war. And the idea for some were, hey, let's, as Lincoln said in the Gettysburg Address, as he said, right, that you have to honor the dead, right? We have to honor what these men nobly sacrificed and nobly advanced. And that we have to be in line to the great task remaining before us. To be devoted so that they didn't die in vain. And that resonated with people. And there were people in the country, right, toward the beginning of Reconstruction who greatly tried to help the blacks. But as time goes on, and as agendas are set, and political agendas, state agendas, those things fell to the wayside. And as Sister Regina just said, because we did not restore, we just freed. Lincoln died and there was no restoration. The country needed to be restored, but it wasn't. Love conquers hate, brother. Yes. Yes. You have to be able to hear, we're coming down about the last 8 minutes of the program. So let me tell you this as we go into this new year. I have tried for the better part of this whole last year to share history with people of all cultures. I've tried to share painful history, things that maybe you didn't know about, and they're not good things that you want to know, but they're significant because they teach us how far we've come and how we've helped each other. When I look at the beginning of the NAACP was formed with both whites and blacks. When I look at the Black and Tan movement, those were white and black Republicans who wanted the country to be better. Nowadays, we get into the idea of, well, Republicans were, it was the intention, not the name. It was the intention. And when the intention changed, the intent changed in the Black and Tan movement. When they started toward the end of Reconstruction, pushing blacks out of these state jobs and these federal jobs and Congress, the intent changed. So don't get caught up on a label, Democrat, Republican, or whatever. It was the intent. Earl made a point that he wondered if Lincoln had lived would things have been better. I don't know. But I believe that Lincoln had the intent for things to be better. I believe that Grant had the intent for things to be better, and then scandal happened. Because you have to also understand, I think I've shared this with people before, that there were just as many racists in the North as they were in the South. And to this day, that is the case. To this day. When Dr. King came up to Chicago, He said it was one of the most racist places he had ever been. That's something to say, considering that you're down in the South, right? With the Klan. The other thing with that is, people want to separate a united front. One of the reasons why those organizations like the Black and Tan movement fell prey to the Lily White movement, real name, real movement, was because a united black, white, yellow, red is a strong bond of people working together, understanding each other, a tricultural experience. I shared with you all over the last year how tricultural experiences are evident throughout the entire American history. Benjamin Franklin praising the Indians and the Indian councils on how they presented the law and passed down things to their tribes. There's so much that happens with unity. Daley refused to let King speak. Didn't he? Yeah. He refused. He didn't want to really meet with him. Dr. King was in Chicago for quite some time. Quite some time. But wait. You're talking about a city which Democratic, if we want to play the political thing again, it doesn't matter. Daley sat at a time, right, when there was huge Black support for the Democratic Party, but did nothing for Black people. And in many ways harmed them, victimized them. It's the intent. It's the intent. And too often I think we lose ourselves trying to find some political party to go to and not looking at the intent. If people aren't trying to hear and bring folks together, you need to be wary. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so happy I was able to get on today. I know we ran late. I'm sorry that we got in here later. This program is such a labor of love for me. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love when you all get on and you interact. I love that we can discuss these things and we can share history that hasn't been shown or given to you. And I thank you for your support over this last year. There have been many things that have happened, but I am so happy that we have folks who get on here, every week and support us. We're trying to do more, and we will do more coming up here to get this network to, in my opinion, where it needs to go, to actually put out more history to you and to get our people to better understand knowledge of self. And by allowing us to understand knowledge of self, we can also inform others and other cultures, because we will better know who we are and where we come from and what we have contributed. And as I think that was such a significant thing that Sister Regina said right there, so that we can start to heal that broken spirit of people who don't know who they are, who don't understand their history and aren't taught it, or taught sections of it to make you feel you know something when in reality you don't know the whole story. We're going to start dwelling into some Red Summer things coming up here within the next couple episodes. I think that is significant. I wanted to go over some of it. We touched on it a little bit early part of this year, and we kind of deviated from it. We're talking about all of the lynchings and the things and the race riots that have happened in this country. I'm going to start getting more into that. But ladies and gentlemen, we are at this hour. I thank you. I thank you again. You all have a great and wonderful new year. Please, please, please share, like, get more people to try to watch Erudition. We have more things coming. And again, I was going to tell you, have a good new year, have a safe new year. Uh, don't be out there when they're shooting all of those guns. And we'll see you all next week. We will be here next week. But again, I thank you. Have a great and wonderful, wonderful new year.